The term net neutrality has been around for more than a decade. The American Civil Liberties Union defines it as preserving the freedom and openness of the internet. In principle, that means you are free to go online and access any legal content you want. Some large telecommunication companies would like to change that. Dr. Nicol Turner-Lee, Vice President and Chief Research and Policy Officer for the Minority Media and Telecommunications Council, is joining us to help us understand the implications of net neutrality. It is, Dr. Lee, a very chewy topic, and when I met you, you really knew how to break it down,
Hello.
which is what we do on DC Breakdown. So help us out. Okay, let's start from the beginning. What does net neutrality mean, coming out of your mouth?
Yeah, thanks, Angela, for having me here.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a topic, like you said, we were at a movie premiere talking about net neutrality. That speaks volumes,
Exactly.
right, to why I'm sitting here. I think what we're hearing now is for your listening audience to better understand this concept. The internet right now and the way that we know it is fantastic. You know, the things that we can do with the internet, the places that we can go, the aspirations that we can have, all take place in the beauty of the internet. And some people don't understand that actually the internet has really taken off in the last 5 years as we've seen mobile technology through our smartphones and our smart iPads and other devices allow us to connect at any time, any place, and anywhere. What's happening now is this conversation that's been around for quite some time, which is how do we preserve this openness of the internet? How do we ensure that content that you or I or anybody else creates does not get interrupted and flows freely to the internet, you know, without any type of blockage by companies that may decide that this is relevant or irrelevant content?
So explain to me everything. No.
Yeah. I'll break it down.
Explain to me, how does a company, what's the rub now with the whole net neutrality?
Right.
Because
Well,
you got to break it down for me.
Yeah, I'll break it down for you and hopefully everybody else understands, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the challenge here is, I think, in terms of the way that the question of net neutrality has been framed, that we're in the wrong direction. The internet, again, will always remain open. If you saw what happened in Ferguson, for example, with the use of the Twitter sphere and the use of Facebook and the real-time alerts, that is a sign that the internet right now is working in this very open environment. Some would disagree, though. I mean, some would say that we have to put rules in place and we have to have values like net neutrality that treat the internet almost as if it's a civil rights concern.
So what does that mean would happen then? I mean, someone would be interfering with my content?
Possibly. I mean, we've actually seen, in all honesty, Angela, only one case of that was managed by a company. You know, there was a case where a company actually blocked content but corrected itself after that, indiscretion was brought up. We have not seen in the internet universe the level of disruption that has been purported by a lot of the debate. You know, what we've seen, I think, that is unequivocally shared by everybody is that we do not need a place like the internet that is blocked, where content is blocked, where information is not transparent, where people feel that they're not receiving in the same rate in which they paying the information that they buy. You know, whatever you subscribe to for your service should be what you get. And I think all of us agree with that. I mean, I think what you're hearing when you hear this concept of net neutrality, much like many of your listeners, the debate is around how do we approach the preservation of the internet? And I think that's where it gets very contentious.
But there was a court case, because the FCC is so integrally involved in this now, and the court case that came out, was it January of this year? I think
January of this year.
Tell us about the court case and how that began this whole dialogue.
That's right. Well, and I think that's where most people, when they hear this concept who don't know anything about it, get like, well, did something happen over there?
Right, exactly.
The DC Circuit Court basically was in a case with Verizon around these principles of net neutrality and open internet that have been around for many, many years. It's not the first time. This is the same conversation debated over and over again. In this particular case, the DC Circuit Court did not close the door for the Federal Communications Commission to investigate ways to provide some parameters on what net neutrality and open internet look like. So that's where we are today. The DC Circuit Court further empowered the Federal Communications Commission to either use one level of authority, which is 706, or Title II, which regulates former telephone service, which many of your listeners probably don't know what it looks like to have a telephone in their house.
Exactly.
I was talking to a young person the other day, and I was
They were
talking
like,
about a
huh?
telephone. She did. She was like, I have never seen what you're talking about. When you say rotary, is that a bicycle? You know, and I'm like, no, honey, that's when you had to push the buttons on the phone, right? You know, you can probably relate to this. This is when your number was NE6.
That's right.
You know, it wasn't like we do it today.
That's right.
And so what we see today, Angela, is this debate, which I think is going to pretty much reflect the future of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Do we allow the Federal Communications Commission as an independent agency to allow the internet to fully flourish and grow? We don't know yet what is actually going to happen with the internet in the next 5 years. Because guess what? We're just 5 years away from seeing what happened, you know, just in this present.
Yeah, right.
But the FCC, as a result of that case, has the ability to also look at other enforcement measures, and that's what's called Title II, which regulated former telephone service in which we barely see any of that technology still available. So that's where this debate, that's where this tension is right now. How do we keep the internet open, and how do we come up with a framework that allows the consumer to be protected, and for people like yourself who are creating content to allow that ebb and flow so that you can freely compete against larger companies like Netflix when you want to be able to get your content there.
So I know that the Comcast, Verizon, they're all a part of wanting things to be a certain way. Explain from the giant telecommunications standpoint what it is they want.
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of the giant telecommunications, if you look through, as I have, their comments, they clearly are looking for, you know, less regulation. And less regulation, given the fact that they've invested, you know, billions of dollars in the infrastructure that we have now. And I think to the extent to which they're able to actually grow that infrastructure allows them some leeway to benefit from, you know, what the internet has afforded to consumers. On the flip side, there are folks, again, that would request less regulation and would like to see price caps and would like to see the ecosystem managed better by government, much like telephone service was much more available to people. They'd like to see, you know, back in the days, if you recall, with telephone service, to call from, I'm from New York, to call from, you know, Mount Vernon to the Bronx was like $100 phone call.
Remember
right?
that?
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Because of regulation,
Right.
And so what we're seeing on the other side of companies is this conversation about, well, we want more regulation so these companies don't get more gluttonous and fatter. I can speak on behalf of MMTC as well as the civil rights community. We actually would like to see a middle framework. We don't want to see Title II because I think something that's missed in this conversation, which is relevant to your folks, is that there are about 36 million people that are still offline. So as much as
many of these minorities, many of them, let's just call it down, black folks.
That's right. And so that's part of the problem. You know, back in the days when my grandmother had a telephone, my mother had a telephone, my aunt had a telephone, it was much more ubiquitous.
Yes.
And what we're seeing right now is if you're poor, if you're undereducated, if you're disabled, if you're a senior, you have not yet experienced what the internet actually looks like. And what our concern as a civil rights community, for the most part, is saying, let's find a way to keep this ecosystem going. So in no way are we fighting for no regulation, but let's also be careful that whatever we put into place does not stifle my grandmother, you know, my aunt, my neighbor, my, you know, person, my cousin that's in rural America from actually getting online because we've stifled, you know, we've made these companies say no more investment. I tell people all the time, I used to be at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies doing research on the availability of broadband access in our communities. They didn't build out then. And we should be concerned that they'll build out, you know, now if we put in something that actually stifles the ability of them to innovate.
So is there a possibility that your grandmother, your mother, my grandmother, my mother may end up having less access, slower speed access if the giant telecoms get their way?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that's a question. I mean, the FCC put forth a proposal around paid fast lanes. You know, so sort of like the easy toll pass system where if you had enough money, you can drive through the fast lane. So, you know, if you're a Netflix, you could always opt to get on the fast lane to get your content to the consumer quicker. I think for the most part, people have said, we don't really honor, in particular the civil rights community, paid prioritization unless it's commercially reasonable, which still has to be defined, right? At the same token, we struggle too, because what if, yourself or somebody in your audience were to create the next Netflix, and from a business perspective, they wanted to be sure that they got their content as a minority entrepreneur? Do we push back on that? What if I wanted my healthcare records, because I'm facing diabetes, to be delivered to me quicker because it's a matter of life and death? As a health insurance company, would we give them that option? So I think there's still more conversation that needs to be had. I mean, we're still in the process of this discussion. We know that President Obama wants to see net neutrality equally enforced, and we all agree with that. Again, it comes back to how do we get to the same goal? An internet that allows for the discovery, the investment, the innovation, the engagement that is taking most people offline and putting them online, right? And then at the same token, to your point, how do we also balance and put checks and balance on enforcement and transparency and no blocking, so we don't feel that large companies are coming in and usurping this ecosystem that has been the lowest barrier to entry for any American? And I think that's where, we again have to, for people of color in particular, it's one thing for us to come out and say, as social activists, well, we just need to lock down the companies. But by locking them down, what impact disproportionately could it have on our people?
Right.
And I think that's a conversation that still needs to be had. It's been very unfortunate too, Angela.
Are they having this conversation? Are the appropriate people, whether it's the FCC or the
they are having the conversation. I mean, just to be transparent, the FCC is having this conversation by soliciting public input on these issues. They have for the last 6 or 7 months. Will continue to do so through the end of this or the middle of this month before they make a decision. The companies have submitted comments. The progressive groups have submitted comments. I mean, I have to be honest, where it has gotten a lot contentious is, I think, more so on the left side of the argument, where the left has been very critical of the civil rights community and their opinions and views. It's been a very dogmatic time. I told somebody I've never...
I see this look on my face.
I know, where it's been seen like this, well, I'm not going to keep your show on this, but where there has been a lot of posturing around who has the ability to speak for the internet.
All right.
Right.
All right. I know I wanted to ask you if hacking has anything to do with this, and you said no, that it does not.
No.
But you are in the middle of writing something up about hacking, right? I just want to get that, and we're gonna have you back to talk about that. Dr. Nicol Turner-Lee, thank you for,
thanks for having me.
Listen, I barely had to say a word. I was so entranced. I was with the Minority Media and Telecommunications Council. We appreciate you coming here and really articulating what this is and how this impacts our community.
That's right.
Us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Job well done. We'll see you soon.
Yes, I'll come back.
I know you. I know your number. I know how to get you.
This one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, some racially insensitive remarks forced the majority owner of the Atlanta Hawks to sell his share of the team. We'll explain. That's next.